Our top story: after yesterday's attack from Russia, Ukrainian President Zelensky has urged Switzerland to re-allow the re-export of weapons to his nation. He says the move will be vital in defeating Russian forces. Russian President Vladimir Putin has claimed that Ukraine's counteroffensive has been unsuccessful, adding that Kiev's losses are approaching a catastrophic level. Now, Russia aims to deploy nuclear weapons in Belarus, and amid the sanctions offensive from the West, Putin met the Mexican president and said he was considering withdrawing from the Black Sea grain deal because he claims that the West has cheated Moscow by implementing false sanctions.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin claimed on Tuesday Ukraine's counteroffensive had so far failed, saying without providing evidence that Ukrainian forces had suffered catastrophic casualties. Russian state TV broadcast Putin speaking to war reporters and military bloggers at the Kremlin in some of his widest-ranging remarks since the invasion of Ukraine. During the several hours of questioning, he was shown claiming Ukraine had lost 25 to 30% of military vehicles supplied by Western countries, and that its human losses were 10 times higher than Russia's. Reuters was unable to immediately verify his assertions. Putin did acknowledge that Russia needed to strengthen its defences against attacks on its own territory and warned he may need to impose a so-called sanitary zone inside Ukraine to prevent such attacks.
And if this continues, then we will have to consider the possibility, I say this very carefully, of creating some kind of buffer zone on Ukrainian territory to the kind of distance from which it would be impossible to reach our territory.
When Putin ordered Russian forces into Ukraine in February last year, one of their first acts was to try to capture the capital Kyiv, which they failed to do so. Putin did not rule out a second attempt to take the city, saying it was only him who could answer the question. He did add, however, that there was no need for a further mobilization of men to fight, for now. Russian forces are currently battling Ukrainian soldiers along a 600-mile front line, well away from the capital. Ukraine says it will never rest until every Russian soldier is ejected from its land.
I'm very concerned because, of course, this is a zone and you are well informed about the situation in general. This is or quite close to the plant. There is active combat, so we are worrying that there could be, obviously, mathematically, the possibilities of a hit. We had those without any counter-offensive, so all the more so now that we have all these combats in the area that this could happen.
Большая цель. Цель еще такая, что мне ответят. У нас ракеты и бомбы мы получили от России. Бомба в 3 раза мощнее, чем Хиросима и Нагасаки. Но там больше 80 тысяч мгновенно погибло, 250 от одного удара. А это одна бомба в 3 раза мощнее. Это, я не знаю, под 1 миллион человек погибнет сразу. Не дай бог применять это оружие. Оно будет рассредоточено в Беларуси. У нас же хранилищ этих, как собак в деревне. Серьезно, у нас их было много. Мы их уже сегодня 5-6 это восстановили, будем больше восстанавливать. И мы рассредоточим, мы не будем же держать в одном месте.
And also what we are learning is that when it comes to the entire offensive between the two forces, what's happening is that there is a big question mark over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. Ladies and gentlemen, the International Atomic Energy Agency chief, Rafael Mariano Grossi, arrived at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to assess the situation after the Kakhovka dam blast. He earlier requested both countries to spare the nuclear plant to avoid a radioactive disaster. Now let's get to our guest who is joining us on the broadcast. Alexandra Malevich, chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, is joining us on the broadcast. Thank you, Mr. Malevich, for joining us on CNN News 18. My first question is that when it comes to all these concerns that are being raised about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in the wake of the Kakhovka blast, what is the situation currently on the ground in the wake of the dam breach? Is there a potential for a nuclear incident in the area?
of course, unfortunately, there is a potential risk of such nuclear accident in Zaporizhia nuclear power station because it is under control, under occupation of Russian troops. And Putin several times had hinted, several times implied that there can be a kind of nuclear accident. In reality, he's using nuclear blackmail. Nuclear blackmail. And the situation is dangerous, especially when Russia had undermined Kakhovka power station because it had direct influence upon system of cooling of nuclear power plant. So it was maybe the first step made by Putin in order to continue his nuclear blackmail and to threaten the whole world with a nuclear threat.
Right, right. And when it comes to Putin's relationship with Belarus, this entire pitch that's coming in from Putin to move nuclear warheads into Belarus as some contingency option that he's trying to put out there, it reminds me of the Cuban Missile Crisis when those nuclear weapons were moved to Cuba to threaten the United States during the height of the Cold War. Do you sense that the West is not taking this entire nuclear threat too seriously, even though they're supporting Ukrainian forces with arms and ammunition?
First of all, you're absolutely right. By drawing comparison or parallels between Cuban missile crisis and deployment of Russian nuclear warheads in the territory of Belarus, because Putin is a Soviet person. He was brought up in the Soviet Union, and he thinks in terms of Soviet blackmail. At the same time, we understand that it's a very dangerous gamble on the part of Putin because he threatens virtually to undermine nuclear non-proliferation regime. And no one is going to be happy about it, including China, by the way, which is Russian ally. China is not interested in deployment of Russian nuclear arsenal in the territory of Belarus.
Right, but the problem is that the West is looking at the fact that, like, if you look at the Republicans currently in the West, they are saying that it's time for dialogue with Putin, and to have such a bullish approach with Putin is not working. A lot of the Republicans who are now fighting for the presidential ticket, they believe that if they can wean Russia away from China, it will be a better route towards peace. They're in fact saying that having a dialogue between the United States and Russia is the way forward to peace. How do you see that pitch coming in from the Republican Party in the United States?
Well, first of all, there are some apprehensions on the part of not many American politicians regarding alliance between Russia and China. But the truth is that Russia and China have strategic partnership without limits. And China, under no circumstances, is going to sacrifice Putin. China is not interested in defeat of Putin because China is going to capitalize on this war. It's one of the beneficiaries. And one more thing, the West should not fall for the Putin's blackmail because Putin aims to destroy the strength of the will of the Western countries to support international law, security, and Ukraine as a part of European security architecture. And the West, I hope, will not fall for this blackmail and will continue to support Ukraine.
Right. Mr. Malevich, I want to shift focus back to the situation inside Ukraine. We're getting this report from Ground Zero in the wake of this Russian missile attack. Let's listen into that.
Мужики, смотреть надо, может, не? Аккуратно, аккуратно. Слышу. Голова у меня. Голова вот. Сейчас поможем. Сейчас приподнимем. Пожалуйста. Сейчас поднимем. Все нормально. Да, давайте.
It's a harrowing situation. Civilians caught in the crossfire in Ukraine as Russia literally rains down hell on the civilians in Ukraine. Those visuals on your screen, ladies and gentlemen, you can see the common Ukrainian using, their bare hands to save people from the rubble. And I want to get your take on that, Mr. Malevich. There was that pitch, I remember, once the conflict had started, that Putin would roll across Ukraine in a matter of weeks and the entire country will be under Russian control. There's a resilience that the Ukrainian people have shown when it comes to not just fighting back against the Russians, but also rejecting the propaganda that was pushed out by the Putin regime, which called the Ukrainian regime Nazis, and they're fighting against the rise of Nazism once again in the region. Decode for us the miscalculations that Putin has made, because this war has now, extended over a year. At the same time now, it's been reduced to a war of attrition between the two sides.
Well, Putin has made several serious political blunders and miscalculations. Among them, he had underestimated very seriously the resilience of Ukrainian nation, our feeling of identity, our will to survive, to fight, and to become part of the European Union, European society. He underestimated it. Second, he had underestimated the will of democratic states to stand with Ukraine and to support us, to provide us with the necessary weaponry. And Putin right now is in panic. He doesn't know what to do. He's desperate. He understands that strategically he has already lost this war. It's only a matter of time when he will be defeated. He's desperate, and he doesn't know what to do.
Right. And my final question, Mr. Malevich, we seldom hear a lot of stories coming in from inside Russia about what the common Russian thinks about this conflict in Ukraine. You have a lot of Russian soldiers who are fighting in the war zone. You have a lot of mercenaries who are also part of Putin's entire war machine. What are you learning about this entire conflict when it comes to the narratives inside Russia? Because we barely hear what the Russian people think about this conflict, because all you hear is what the Kremlin has to say. And the Kremlin is saying that this is a war for justice to defeat Nazism that has taken a hold of Ukraine. What are you learning about the narratives inside Russia? Because this conflict, while it was promised to be a quick conflict, has extended over a year. What are you hearing when it comes to voices inside Russia?
The truth is that majority of Russian population support this war. Only 5%, according to polls, are ashamed of this war. More than 60% are proud of it. So it's not Putin's war, it's Russia's war against Ukraine. And it's colonial, imperialistic, genocidal war against Ukraine. That's why it's so dangerous. Unfortunately, majority of Russians were brainwashed by Russian propaganda. But the problem is also that they want to believe in this propaganda. They are contaminated by this ideology, which is referred to as Russism. It's a new kind of Russian fascism, and they're contaminated by this totalitarian ideology, which hates democracy, which hates freedom, which wants to destroy and annihilate, exterminate Ukrainians. But the moment of truth will come, and it will be very sobering moment of reckoning for Russian population, because history will repeat itself, just in the same way as it happened after Stalin's death. And we'll see when Russian population all of a sudden will wake up, start blaming only Putin for all these terrible genocidal crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and history will repeat itself. And it might happen very quickly, because life is unpredictable and very dynamic.
Right. So there will be a day of reckoning inside Russia. Thank you, Mr. Malevich, for sharing your perspective when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia conflict.